Welcome back to Restless. I'm Father Joseph Gill from the Diocese of Bridgeport, Connecticut, and you've joined myself and Joe as we restlessly seek Christ's solutions to all of the craziness in our world and craziness in our society. And there's a lot of craziness. You know, we've done some episodes on some controversial topics, and because our faith is not afraid to speak truth, hopefully, into these controversies in the world. One of which, we see so tragically all the time in our world is gun violence, whether it's a mass shooting, something large, or whether it's just the daily shooting that we see in the inner cities or whatever. And certainly, what's the solution to that? And we want to talk about that because I think there are a lot of people that debate this issue on guns, gun ownership. Should Americans be allowed to have guns, et cetera? And I'd love to see what your thoughts are on that, Joe. Because you said before we started that this is going to be controversial. So
Yeah, I mean,
curious where you want to go with this.
sure. I mean, the gun thing is inherently controversial, right? And I mean, we're going to talk about it, but I think at like bedrock, part of the problem is that it's not really a problem that's solvable with government policy.
I think we can agree on that.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I didn't think it was gonna be controversy between you and I. I thought it'd be controversy between us and some of our listeners.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. So I think that we can talk. We're going to talk about it. We're talking about different policy suggestions, and I just think that what it really boils down to is that is basically two things. One, guns are a really deeply integrated part of American legal and just like civic culture, and they're not going away. And two, there will always be violence, but violence is really a problem of the human heart and sinfulness and the fall. And I don't know. Like, unfortunately, this is one of those things where, like, the blood of the innocent really does cry out for some sort of response, and I just don't know what that response is, other than the conversion of souls.
Yeah. Well, let's start at the beginning. And the beginning is, what's been your relationship with guns? You know, have you shot guns? Do
I
you
fired a
own
gun
guns?
for the first time in my life this last January.
Really?
I was in Ohio for my now goddaughter's baptism.
Oh, congratulations on being a godfather.
Thank you.
Just
And
number one?
I was number two.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a good set now. I've got a boy and a girl, and it was my college friend, and our other friend was a godmother, and he took us shooting, it was fun. I enjoyed it.
Awesome.
Yeah, that was my first time touching a gun.
Would you do it again? Is it something you enjoyed?
Yeah, I would do it again. I mean, there were some gentlemen next to us firing some assault weapons, as we'll talk about, a term that the definition of which is somewhat
Vague.
non-existent. Yeah. And it was a little uncomfortable, like it was loud. So I don't know how much I'm really getting into it. It's an expensive hobby, but yeah, I would certainly would do it again. I have no problem with doing that. How about you? I mean, you're from Maryland, so you probably had to shoot your dinner every night. So,
it's funny because I grew up near the town of Frederick, Maryland, but we called ourselves Frednecks. Because we really are rednecks out there. I mean, all my friends hunted growing up, and I've actually always wanted to go hunting. It's always been a dream of mine, but I don't have anybody to take me. So if any of our listeners want to take me hunting,
I mean, there are priests that you're friendly with that hunt. You never went with any of them?
No, I never did. I never did. In fact, when I was at a certain parish that shall remain nameless, one that you and I both attended, there was a priest who had a deer stand out in back, because it was about maybe 20 acres there, and there was a deer stand and only bow hunting. But
yeah, I have no like moral problem with hunting. I just don't think I could ever kill an animal.
Really?
Personally, yeah, I suspect that I probably wouldn't like to, but I have no problem with people hunting. I don't chicken out's the right way to say that. I think I would just not. I come from I don't come from. I'm not one of you. I'm not.
That's true.
I've never had to look my food in the eyes.
I grew up somewhat on a farm. I mean, my parents had about 50 chickens. We had a goat at one point. We had all kinds of stuff, and I'd be like, "Hey, Mom, what's for dinner?" Roy, our chicken.
Right.
The chicken that was running around a couple hours prior.
Yeah, and I'm just not a particularly rustic person. I mean, as we discussed recently over dinner, I've never slept outside in my life. I'm very proud to say, and I very much hope that
I'm deeply concerned about that. And I knew a great Catholic speaker who decided to do tent for Lent, where he slept in a tent all of Lent. He's like, that was his penance. So I want to recommend that to you, Joe. I think.
Thank you for your recommendation.
Maybe
Unfortunately,
not.
I just think, Lent begins in a mere 3 hours. I just don't think I have time to fully vet that option and consider it. So,
well, I'll happily send you a tent via express mail if you'd like to do it.
Yeah.
Anyway, not in Philadelphia, but
No.
No, so yeah, growing up I did have guns. I think when I was probably in college, my parents started purchasing some, and we had probably 7 or 8 guns, which we would go target shooting. We had for about 5 years, my parents bought a giant piece of property, probably about 12, 13 acres. And it was farmland. And so like we, farmed it out. And at the very back, we would go target shooting and shotguns and rifles and handguns. And it was enjoyable. I liked it. I remember in Boy Scouts, doing shooting skeet, which was a lot of fun. But it's not something that I'm really passionate about, partly because I'm not very good at it. In Boy Scouts, I never got any of the shooting sports merit badges. I couldn't hit a broads out of a barn. Just not my thing. And that's the same way with video games. Sometimes I'll go over a family's house and their 15-year-old kid would be like, "Hey, let's play Call of Duty," and I'm like, "All right, but I'm really bad." Or Fortnite, and I just sit there and like get killed every 30 seconds, and I'm just bad at like shooting games, shooting experiences. So that's kind of why I don't like it. I can beat anybody in Madden though, football.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm neither good at sports in real life or in video games, but I am pretty good at I have been pretty good at some shooting game. Well, I mean, I've been fine at some of the shooting games in the past compared to the average teenager. I certainly wouldn't be any good, but
Yeah. So why do you think as Americans we do kind of have this weird love relationship with guns? I mean, it's
oh, I think that's one case in which the answer is somewhat clear. I mean, I think it's two things. One, I think that they were somewhat important to the founding of our country and the fact that Americans had firearms at hand.
true. Yeah, I guess the militiamen,
Yeah, and I think and that was, I mean, that was in some sense like the regular way of defending various parts of the country for some time, was these sort of militia made up of people. And then the Second Amendment, obviously, has just enshrined these legal protections, though I mean, to the extent to which they've really been protected over history could be debated, but either way, Second Amendment occupies a very unique place in our national discourse and our national consciousness, I would say.
if not outsized, because every American could tell you what the Second Amendment is. I bet none could tell you what the Third Amendment is. I have
Yeah,
no idea what the Third Amendment is.
well, yeah, was that because the Third Amendment is prohibition on quartering soldiers, so it hasn't been
Oh.
particularly relevant to our nation since its founding.
That's
But
fair. That's fair.
although it has come up recently to my memory,
Really?
in a very sort of oblique way, but
We've got
I
two
mean,
extra rooms at the rectory in case soldiers need it.
yeah,
Happy to let them come in.
that's right. But the Second Amendment, yeah, and the thing is that, to my mind, it's pretty clear grammatically, but it's been the subject of a lot of debate over the few centuries of our nation's history.
I think there's another reason too, and this is kind
Great.
of my vision. So I don't know why, but a lot of Americans love Western movies, and there's kind of this mystical view of the West, and Great Plains, the Rockies, and I think there's a vision that a real American man is somebody who was a cowboy. And
Yeah,
cowboys always had guns. You got to fight the bears, you got to fight the bad guys, the outlaws, this and that. And
yeah, they're
I
a
think it's
Fredneck.
they're Fredneck, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
now Frednecks, drink a lot and ride quads. But back in those days, you're riding a horse and you're sitting in a saddle all day. So I think there's this mythic idea of what masculinity is to an American. That's certainly not the case in Europe. They would laugh at that and be like, why do you need to wear a Stetson? But I think guns are a part of that. In my opinion, it's a
Yeah,
mythical masculine
I think
vision.
that's yeah, I think that's probably right.
So, I mean, obviously, guns themselves, I think we can all agree that guns themselves are not evil, right? They're not wrong. You can use them very well. But so often they've been used very poorly. So what is the solution to ending the mass violence that we see so often in our culture? Is there a
Yeah,
solution?
I mean, as I said in the beginning, there's a pundit that I like. I'm gonna butcher this thing he always says, but it essentially boils down to this: the primary difference between Sweden and America is that Sweden's full of Swedes and America's full of hooligans. But he's right, which is that like Americans are just more violent people. It's not just gun violence. We're more violent with knives, with automobiles, with everything. Um,
Why is that? I mean, I would say it's the
hooligans.
uncomfortableness of diversity, but I don't know if that's the case because a lot of it's
No, I
within
mean,
one culture themselves.
yeah, right. Another uncomfortable fact. What you just said.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know why it is. I think I just know that it is. You know.
Hmm.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to venture a sort of speculative guess on that, but it sort of doesn't matter. And even if Americans weren't more violent than the rest of the world, there's a lot. I mean, let's say we weren't more violent per capita than European nations. There's still a lot more of us than most European countries, right?
And that's
So,
true. So you hear a lot more about the shootings because there's 330 million Americans versus how many Swedes are there?
yeah, who
A few
knows?
million,
And
10
yeah,
million,
I
whatever.
don't know. Sure, I'm not sure we even know that fact. How many Swedes there are? That is.
Pretty sure we
Yeah,
could Google it if we
Yeah,
want.
and I just also think a lot of the stats on some of the mass shooting stuff are sometimes not super helpful. Like, okay, what's a mass shooting? Like, is it
Well, they've
really a
said
mass
four or
shooting?
more, or something like that. But
Yeah, but it's so it's that. I mean, so I mean, it's 5 people shot really a mass shooting. It is, I guess, but not in the same way that 30 people being shot is. So it's hard to look. And sometimes you look at like, oh wow, look at how many school shootings, and it turns out that like 10 of them were like a police officer's gun discharging by accident at like midnight. And it's like, okay, well that's clearly not like what we mean by a school shooting. So it's sometimes hard to
true.
parse out. And there's so much dishonesty, as usual on
Well,
both sides in this.
because
So.
exactly, it can be used as a political pawn in so
Yeah, and
many
I think
ways.
and to that, I think you and I both have we have a similar experience, which is unique to most Americans, probably, or maybe not at this point, unfortunately, which is that you were a priest. You still are a priest, as it turns out, but you were a priest then too. You were a
Yes,
priest when Sandy Hook happened. You were a priest at St. Mary's in Bethel when Sandy Hook happened. I was
about
a
7 miles away. Yes.
I was a freshman in high school when Sandy Hook happened, and I was in Bethel High, which is probably a very similar distance from Sandy Hook. It's the For those who don't know, Sandy Hook is in Newtown, is a hamlet of Newtown, Connecticut, and Bethel is adjacent to Newtown, Connecticut. And I had friends, I have close family friends who grew up and went to Sandy Hook when they were younger.
Mm.
I personally was in lockdown that whole day. Um, we My mom tried to come pull us from school when she saw the news, and Bethel police had set up a like a perimeter around the school system, so no one was getting their kids in or out. There's a lot of misinformation. People thought that we were in danger. People thought that the shooter had escaped, that there was more than one shooter, that they were on their way, that had maps of other schools. So I mean, we really didn't know what was going on. And you had a very unique situation, which maybe you could talk about, of ministering to those victims, or rather
Yeah.
to the victims' families, but really even to the people who were there but survived, right?
Yeah, it was definitely one of the hardest days of my priesthood. Up there with some other tough days. And that was, I mean, because we were 7 miles away. I was texting Father Luke Suarez, who was the parochial vicar
Hmm.
there at the time at St. Rose in Newtown, and just saying, hey, "How you doing? Oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening." So finally, we kept offering, if you need anything, let us know, let us know. So finally, about 10 p.m., he texts us. And he says, can you guys come down to the firehouse in Sandy Hook? And so we all get there, and I was shaking. I was so nervous. And they had a number of clergymen, they had police officers, they had psychologists and therapists. And they said, we need to split into 26 different teams, and each team has to go to the house of one of the victims
Yikes.
of the Sandy Hook shooting and make the official declaration of death. Now, by that time, the families knew that their 6-year-old wasn't coming home. And it was,
Oh
so we
gosh.
walked up to the door that night, about 11:30 p.m. You could hear the wails coming from inside of the house, like just
Yeah.
moans, screams of pain. You'll never forget that. And, so you knock on the door, and they're just crying out, we know already, we know. And
Ah,
so we go
gosh.
in, we sit with the family, I offer to pray, and they said, no, we don't want to pray right now, which I totally understand, totally respect. So we sat with them for about 45 minutes, and a lot of it was silent because there's not a whole lot you can say with a family like that. I mean, there's just no words, right? So, and it's funny though how God works a little bit, because about a couple of years after that, I got assigned to be a chaplain of a Catholic high school in Stamford, Trinity Catholic High School. And I was telling that story to the students, and two of the students spoke up and said, that was our cousin whose house you went to. And I thought, I was like, wow, God used me to minister to these people, just, to let them know that, hey, I was there that night. But that was actually not the hardest part of that time period for me. The hardest part was a couple of days later. They had so many funerals. I think they had 8 funerals at that Catholic church. And so they were overwhelmed. And so they called us for like regular old people funerals and said, can you come down? So I went down to a funeral home down there in Sandy Hook, and just waiting for the family to get ready before we did the little ceremony. And I happened to wander into one of the empty rooms, and there, alone in a casket, was a 6-year-old girl with a veil covering her face because her face had been shot off. And that was when it kind of hit home for me, when I was able to see the body in the coffin, the
Yeah.
tiny little coffin for a 6-year-old. You're like, oh my gosh, like
Mm.
this is very real. And
Yeah.
so
Horrible.
so I think one element, so like there's two elements I want to talk about with like why is America so violent, and what can be done about it. One is the video games and the movies and things like that. And do you think that has any sort of impact on the violence that we perhaps accept or become numb to?
No, I don't. I haven't done extensive research on this, but what I have seen doesn't seem to support much of a connection. I mean, somebody who's maybe sort of in one way or another predisposed to be, a psychopath, right, or something like that, will they perhaps become radicalized in some way, or
Well, that's part of it too. Is
be desensitized? Maybe. Maybe,
the ubiquity
but
of the internet, which when one
yeah.
of these tragedies happens, it gets all out there, and then people kind of copycat. They want to be
Yeah,
as
so I think,
infamous.
right, so that's what I was going to say is that, well, I don't think Call of Duty or Grand Theft Auto or whatever violent movies, I don't personally think that those are very much to blame. I would say, though, that the copycatter effect is very real. The ability to read the manifestos of these losers who, they always are losers, right? Who, they're always like social outcasts. I don't mean to use that. That sounds like a harsh term, but you know what I mean. They're always people who are not kind of like, they're always people on the periphery of society, of
Yeah, it's
their own social
nobody.
circles.
Generally, people aren't like, oh, I never would have seen that coming from that well-adjusted captain of the high school football team,
Right.
with rare exceptions, right?
Right, of course. But the ability to read their manifestos, right? And also just like okay, so yeah, like you do feel like, you feel like a loser and you don't really have any friends and you're kind of isolated, and that maybe makes you angry. And then like, well, look, here's one person whose name will never be forgotten. And there are some news outlets, the few responsible ones, have stopped printing the names of these killers
Mm,
in an attempt to really try to head off the copycat effect and to really rob them of the thing they probably seek. One of the things they seek the most, which is fame, right? And like, well,
yeah,
you're gonna be
notoriety.
noticing me now. And so I
Yeah.
do think, to me, like I have no data to back this up. My personal take would be that would be more like to engender
Mm.
these sort of horrific or these sort of horrific incidents than would be video games, frankly.
Well, that's a great point. That's a great point.
And
But
what
the
do you
other,
think about the
I,
video game question?
about the video game question, I think there is actually a big distinction between something like Call of Duty and something like Grand Theft Auto, because when it's violence in the cause of something greater, like Call of Duty is generally, you're fighting in World War II.
Sure.
That I think we would agree is a noble cause. But something like Grand Theft Auto is wanton violence.
Yeah,
It's
just
violence for the
general
sake of violence, to
degeneracy. Yeah.
steal a car, to
Yeah.
do whatever awful thing. And I think that's an important distinction, because I do think there's, particularly as men, we have aggression, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's meant to be channeled in the right direction, which is to fight for that which is true, beautiful, and good. To fight for those who are under us, and I'm glad men have aggression. It's not something to be pushed down, because that's kind of one of the things that you often see when a shooting like this happens is men are just so aggressive. We need to calm them down. We need to take that aggression out. We don't. We need to rechannel it to the
Right.
right zone. Right. So I think it's
Yeah.
somewhat natural for boys and men to be drawn to video games that are violent. But the question is this violence being used for a larger cause? And I do think, there's senseless violence, and then there's violence for a larger cause.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think maybe I'll just add two quick things. One of which would be that something can, like, not all bad things go to better in the same way not all good things go together. And so, I think that like the games like Grand Theft Auto do contribute to a coarsening of the culture. But that can be true without it being the case. They contribute to like actual mass violence.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I
And
don't think
also,
people are inspired by that to go and
no, it seems
shoot
unlikely
others,
to
but
me. And also, I think, and now this is not some sort of panacea. This is more of a sort of a broader cultural commentary. But I do wonder, yeah. So men have this natural aggression. They're naturally kind of drawn towards violence to some extent, and I think part of that is I had a friend tell me, I don't know if you play chess. I don't really, I never liked chess very much. But
I
he told
like
me
it.
that,
I'm not very good.
yeah,
But
he told me that he said the problem with chess is that uh, if you lose chess, you lost. There's no luck involved. There's nobody else to blame it on. You didn't draw the wrong card. It was just you. Somebody beat you, and there's no question about it. I think there's something about I think there's something to that in the way men are drawn to violence, which is that, like, why do men wrestle? Because it's indisputable. It tells you something inarguable about the two. It tells you who's stronger. You
yeah,
know.
that's true.
So I think that there.
Can't blame it on anyone else. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm not advocating or saying that, like, like kids beating each other up or something like that, like sort of like in a sort of I don't know, and I sort of like go for it sort of ways is good. I'm not saying that at all, but as somebody who taught martial arts for a very long time and took martial arts for a very long time, there's something to be said about like testing yourself physically and even testing yourself with violence physically, but within limits, right? And being superintended by adults. And I just wonder if maybe we've lost the ability to appreciate that as a culture, and maybe that's driven people not necessarily to the violence we're talking about, but to the video games, right? So in other words, if perhaps okay, well, I don't really have an avenue to wrestle with my friends, but I can shoot them in Call of Duty. Now, again, I'm not drawing any lines from any of that to school shooting, but since we're talking about video games, I just wonder if a more healthy way
Well,
of
it's
understanding young male violence in this narrow area would be
yeah.
yeah
Well, I agree because if you look at they often put out like trailers for video games, and the trailers always have some sort of like idea of like this is how you become epic.
yeah
Because I think most men in particular in 21st century America are pretty bored with their lives. They feel like
yeah
there's nothing epic, there's nothing grander to live for than just paying the bills and doing this
yep
and that, right? And so that's why there is this yearning for an epic battle to fight,
yeah a dragon to slay
a
as
dragon to slay,
I
right?
finally by the way finally finished Wild at Heart
I gave it to him about 12 years ago, I believe.
Yeah, it was
But
a long time ago. But our,
it's about
being on
time.
a to recording an episode about my views of the book really inspired me to want to finish it. So
Glad you could give a very
yeah,
unexperienced
yeah. I was
review
honest about that when I
review of
recorded
it.
it. So yeah,
That's fair. That's fair. That's fair. But the other piece that I think that we're not talking enough about is the mental health aspect of pretty much everybody that falls into this mass violence. Is that why are we allowing guns in the homes of those who have serious mental illness? It should be a no-brainer, and especially, I mean, and I think in our desire to be non-controversial and to not stigmatize people with mental illness, we're allowing too much, because it was clear in every way, shape, and form that Adam Lanza, the shooter at Sandy Hook, had some severe, whether it was on the autism spectrum or something, some severe issues that were not being dealt with well, and that the mom found no issue with bringing guns home. I mean, there should be a red
yeah.
flag, but I think nobody wanted to say that because it seems unkind, or
Yeah, I agree with that. The problem, like as they say, the devil is in the details. And this is a good maybe segue to something else I wanted to raise, which is that I think a lot of times what's kind of common sense is common sense, but it's not easy to execute. So okay, so
that's
take your
fair.
example, right? So why do we allow firearms in the homes of people with mental illness? Well, what does that mean? I mean, you probably don't mean people with anxiety or OCD, right? Or depression. You probably
No,
mean people
I
who
do mean depression, to be honest, and maybe
okay.
even anxiety. Yeah,
Okay, well, I mean, okay, so let's think about
I
if we
mean,
think about yeah, I mean, what that means is that you have to have, I mean, people have to be some way adjudged, right, to have these that has to be disclosed because I mean, we were talking about a constitutional right, right? So it's only
right.
taken away with due process, which means that somebody
Yeah,
who
and then you have
seeks mental
HIPAA
health,
laws,
mental help will be knowing that there could be now like a judge to be incompetent to own firearms.
right?
That might
But
have, can that
at
be
this,
counterproductive, you know?
at the same time, I know that airline pilots, are not allowed to fly if they're on antidepressants. Do you know that?
I didn't know that specifically, but again, like flying isn't a constitutional right, right? Like you literally have to have like you get licensed to do it as an occupation. So people always draw
True,
these
but
things, but it's never a one-to-one comparison, you know?
no. But I mean, there's lots of reasons why someone might lose a constitutional right to bear arms,
Yes,
right? I mean,
that's
it's
true. But
rights are
again,
not like so firm that you can't take them away for a
yes,
justified reason.
yes, but a prescription would be surprising to me if that would rise to the level.
I mean, granted, most of these people that commit these crimes are not just I'm a little depressed, I'm going to my doctor to get some Prozac. It's more like
Right.
we've had behavior issues from the time you were in kindergarten, up to senior year of high school. So
Yeah, and again, like, how do we catch it? Like, how do we capture this? How do we capture this in a legal system? I really don't know.
that I don't
Like
know either. I
people
don't
always
have a
throw these
solution for that one.
red flag laws, and I'm open to the idea of them, but again, like you need to be careful. It get like okay, this is why I want to bring it up and this is sort of why one of the reasons I mentioned the Sandy Hook connection earlier. I don't know how much this frustrates you, but it really frustrates me when people will go out there after one of these mass shootings and say, okay, guys, we know the drill. We need to ban assault weapons. We need universal background checks. They go through their litany, and almost universally, the things they mention have no connection to the actual incidents. In other words, they'll come out there and say, we need universal background checks. We need to ban assault weapons. We need to get rid of silencers and extended magazines. Meanwhile, the killing happened with a pistol that was registered. So oftentimes there's no
Right.
connection. No, I mean, and I'm yet to hear the reasonable and constitutional gun control policy that would have prevented Sandy Hook. You know what I mean? So I think sometimes
That's fair.
not
Yeah.
we, people, I mean, cynics will take these events and they'll kind of they'll throw out what they already believed about gun policy.
Yeah.
And I just think it's, again, like it's not compassionate, because you're not, you're using the emotions of people who are going through something really, 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 I mean, truly awful, to push things that wouldn't necessarily have stopped it.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, we don't know how many school shootings have already been stopped because of vigilance, because of this law or that law. So, I mean, we're only seeing the ones that slip through, not the ones that have been successfully stopped, which is good. But I think you're right in that this is very hard to legislate, and it'd be very hard to find put all the pieces together to completely eliminate it, because, as you mentioned at the very beginning, and I think you had a great point, that it's a matter of the human heart.
Right.
Right. And St. Maximilian Kolbe said that the battleground between God and Satan is the human soul. Right. So good and evil goes through every human heart. And I wonder if there's a connection between the loss of God in a society and the increase in gun violence. I mean, do you think that's a fair connection to make?
Hard to imagine there wouldn't be, right? Yeah, hard to imagine there wouldn't be. And so, yeah, so there's a theological aspect, right, which is this is ultimately a problem of original sin and of man's own sinfulness and of American man's lack of connection with God. And also, I think, like, some people will say, well, look at Europe. There's no gun violence in Europe. And they'll say that, like, on the same day that some terrorist drives a car into a crowd and kills 20 people. So it's like, okay, well, like, my goal is not to stop gun violence. My goal is to stop violence.
Violence, period.
Like,
yeah.
I don't want like, the goal shouldn't just be, well, few people are killed by guns, few people are killed. So if I trade a pistol for a car, or a car for a knife, or a knife for a rock, now in some of these examples.
Now, granted, yeah, a gun is easier to kill someone than a rock. But,
sure,
yeah,
of course.
But I hear what you're saying. Absolutely.
I think.
I mean, without falling into despair, we have to acknowledge that violence has been around since Cain and Abel.
Right.
So literally, it goes all the way back to the second generation of human beings on this earth. So to want to completely eliminate violence would be very difficult. It should be a goal, without a doubt. I'm not despairing and saying, well, let's give up. But I'm saying that to totally eliminate it would require the total conversion of all souls, really.
Well, yeah, I mean, right. It would require this. It would require the second coming of Christ, right? I mean, it would require the end of time. I mean, fulfillment of all things. Yeah, I mean, if we're being totally honest with ourselves. Although I do think, I mean, again, this is not you can't legislate. There should be civil society, but civil society would also be a help in this, right? Like, in other words, if there are more mediating institutions, people were part of things. If more boys were part of Boy Scouts and other clubs, and parents had more social clubs, and there's more friends, and people.
If more boys had fathers in their lives,
right? But
that's
again,
an important piece.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
teach them how to.
Exactly. There's also things like this we could say, but again, you can't write a law that says that there shall be more fathers in homes, and more boys should be involved in sports, right? So
Right.
So and now, okay, so then how does the problem get solved? Well, I think it's probably solved by you and by me. I mean, it gets solved by people whose job it is to be a doctor for souls.
Well, that was a big, I mean, to be honest, that was kind of a big impetus in my own life towards the priesthood, in that, there's a lot of problems out there in the world: poverty, violence, this and that. And to me, I was trying to figure out, okay, how can I make the most impact? Well, if I feed somebody, that's wonderful, but it keeps them satisfied for 4 hours, and then I have to feed them again. What is going to lead to the deepest fulfillment, the most profound and change? And it is conversion. It's conversion to Jesus Christ, who is the only Savior of the world, and the only way in which violence is going to be ended, when the Prince of Peace becomes King of our life. So those are some great points. So thank you, Joe, for this great episode, and thank you to our listeners who joined us. I think our challenge, is, first of all, to see, how we have been peacemakers in our own life. Because I think that's a role every Christian needs to play. Jesus himself says, "Blessed are the peacemakers." And Jesus, as the Prince of Peace, recognizes that the peace of Christ should settle within our own hearts, with our own families, and that's going to then radiate out to the world. So let's work on peace among us as Christians, among us and our friends, and hopefully that'll bring peace to this very sad, war-torn world that so desperately needs the conversion of Christ. You can find us on Veritas Catholic Network, 1350 AM and 103.9 FM. Also on YouTube, on Instagram, and all those other fun places where you get your podcasts. So tune in next time to Restless.